Hello, my name is Brian. I'm a writer with over 25 books published on Amazon. And welcome to the third video in this series, Chapter 3, Father Jacob and Mrs. Fitz. Here we'll see young Philip try to adapt to the household where he will be living for the foreseeable future. Again, I'll leave a link to finding and downloading the book on its Amazon page. Please get the book for your collection and leave a rating and a review. Chapter 3, Father Jacob and Mrs. Fitz. Philip took his bags to the room he was assigned and changed into clothes he hardly ever wore. Not since he was a teenager back in Ottawa had he done any manual labor. He put on the jeans and t-shirt he was advised to bring by his mother, then went outside and located the hugely overgrown tool shed in back of the chapel. Even getting into the shed was a battle against the growth that had taken it over. Once inside, the shed was a journey through time. He saw manual shears about 14 inches long, a hand-driven lawnmower with rotating blades, and long-handled pruning shears. He stared at those ancient tools inside. He put on the working gloves he brought and started hauling out tools, boxes, and every kind of refuse that ever existed. It took him almost an hour to sort out what was what. When he had emptied the shed, he took a mental inventory of what was there, and then went back inside the church to find Father Jacob. "Father, I found a lot of junk in that shed," he said while wiping the sweat from his brow. "Is there anything in particular you want to save? I'm going to toss it all in the trash." Jacob looked alarmed and tottered to the window at the side of the building. He scowled and turned on the young man. "You'll do no such thing, boyo," he snapped. "Put it all back. I want every last bit of it back in that shed." Philip sighed and rolled his eyes. "Yes, Father," he said. He returned to the shed and looked over the pile of junk he'd placed on the ground. Then he spent the next 30 minutes stacking the boxes, bags, and assorted collection of disused items into the back of the shed. He left enough room in front for the gardening tools to fit. Then he looked over the museum piece-style tools and groaned. "This is not going to be easy," he grumbled. He stepped around the back of the chapel and walked in the back door. He was thirsty and needed a drink. As soon as he opened the door, he was greeted by a loud shriek of alarm. "Saints preserve us!" an elderly woman at the kitchen sink screamed. "Who in God's name are you?" She made the sign of the cross over her chest when she used the Lord's name in vain and took several backward steps. Her eyes were filled with fear and her breath came in gasps. Father Jacob limped into the kitchen and sighed. "Don't be alarmed, Mrs. Fitz," he said gently. "The seminary school sent this young man to help me. Boyo apologized to Mrs. Fitz for scaring her." Philip gulped and looked from one to the other. "Well," Jacob growled, "apologize." Philip bowed his head slightly and took a deep breath. "I'm sorry for scaring you," he said to her. "I was only coming in for water." The woman calmed down and looked him over. "Millie told me you were haunting the diner at the crossroads last night," she said, and then she scurried out of the room. Father Jacob glowered at Philip under his bushy brows. "Be more careful, boyo," he barked. Philip sighed heavily and went to the refrigerator. He found it almost bare. There were a few containers for leftovers, a small glass bottle of milk, and a meager collection of vegetables. "Is there any water?" he asked the priest. Jacob stopped in the doorway and scowled at him. "Can you not see the tap over the sink?" "No, I meant bottled water." "Bottled? What in heaven's name do you think this is? A holiday resort?" No, Philip protested. I just meant, well, most people have bottled water nowadays. Jacob sighed. We don't. The water in the tap is what we have. Get used to it. He turned and continued into the hallway. Philip sighed and looked at the water tap with suspicion. He sighed again and found a glass in one of the cupboards. When he filled it from the tap, he held the glass up and eyed the water in it with disgust. He put it to his lips and took a taste. Then he took a great breath. He filled his mouth from it. It did not taste like cholera, but then he wouldn't know what cholera tasted like. He swallowed the mouthful and expected to be hit with a case of the shits within seconds. When that did not happen, he took another mouthful. He gagged midway through it and spat most of it into the sink. He spent a long time hawking up into the sink. Then he rinsed it down and wiped it with a cloth. He went back outside to get working on the yard and grounds. Philip spent the whole of the day working and sweating over the grounds. He managed to mow the lawn even with the ancient walking mower. He found that using it was a lot easier than he had thought it would be, though it did get bogged down if the blades got clogged. He soon learned to use the thing and got the front yard cleaned respectably after an hour and a half. He frowned when he saw the remains of all the weeds that had taken root. Looking once again in the shed, he found a trowel. He held it in his hand and frowned at it. Tomorrow, he mumbled. Weeds tomorrow. He then spent the next 4 hours trimming and pruning the vines that threatened to block the windows on the church. When that was done, he looked over what he'd accomplished and grinned. Not bad for a city boy, he snickered. Then he went inside. Before he opened the back door, he paused and called out, It's me, Mrs. Fitz. I'm coming in. When he went inside, she was standing at the counter chopping vegetables. She looked his way and then turned back. I hope you like lamb stew, she said without looking at him, because that's what we're having for supper. If you don't like it, don't tell me and you can go hungry. Philip hid the smirk that sprung to his lips and turned away for a moment. Lamb stew will be wonderful, Mrs. Fitz. She sniffed again and went back to her vegetables. Is there a bucket I can use? He asked. I want to wash the windows tomorrow. She bit her lip and nodded to the hallway outside the kitchen. Broom closet on the left. He nodded his thanks and opened the first door on the left that he came to. He immediately stepped back and gagged from the reek that oozed through the doorway. The stench was like a living thing. It cloyed in the back of his throat and nose. It made him want to vomit, but he clamped a hand tightly over his mouth. Not that one! Mrs. Fitz shrieked. Philip reached for the doorknob to close it, but he was squeezing his eyes shut, and he was overwhelmed by the smell. A cloud of cold air settled around his legs and ankles and seemed to suck the heat out of his body. He grabbed the doorknob finally and slammed the door shut, but it was too late. The reek and cold had already escaped, and Philip wondered how they would rid the place of the overpowering stench. He staggered back into the kitchen and gagged. He began to feel his skin crawling. He felt like 1,000 insects were swarming all over him, but when he looked at his arms, he could see nothing. Mrs. Fitz stood stiffly and fixed her eyes on the counter and the cutting board where all her vegetables were. She stared at them through watery eyes and scurried to the garbage container. With one sweep of her knife, she shoved all of the food into the trash. The reek in the kitchen was now so bad that neither of them could tolerate it anymore. They went out the back door and inhaled deeply of the fresh air outside. "What was that?" he asked in a strangled voice. The old woman was shivering despite it being a warm and sunny day. "What was that?" he asked again. Mrs. Fitz began to mutter a prayer over and over again while signing the cross over her chest. She stared at the horizon and continued to pray. "Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our defense against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly hosts, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan, all evil spirits who probe the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen." "What was that?" he asked for a third time. Father Jacob burst through the door and glared at him angrily. "That was the gates of hell, boyo," the priest shouted. "Never open that door again. Do you hear me? Never do that again." Philip recoiled and stepped back from the father. His face was filled with rage, and Philip could hardly believe that such a commanding voice could come from such a frail old man. "What? Never," I said. "Never." "What's down there?" Philip insisted. "There's nothing down there," Jacob insisted. "It's the old priest's hole," Mrs. Fitz mumbled. "Priest's hole?" Jacob scowled and groaned. "It's a priest's hole, boy," he snapped. "In the old days, builders used to include a priest's hole in the buildings they erected, a place where a priest could hide from the king's men in search of Catholics." None of this was very helpful to Philip. He had never heard of such a thing before. Jacob turned and went back inside. Mrs. Fitz followed him, and Philip was left with his mouth dry and his limbs shaking. Once again he went to the sink and poured a glass of water. It was the only water he was going to get, and he needed a drink. He was going to have to get used to it. He opened all the windows and spent the rest of the day airing the place out to get rid of the smell.